Hello, I'm Corey Hello, and welcome to another episode of Critimation, where I review animated TV shows and films. As always, I do not own any of these films or shows. They are properties of their respected owners. For this video, I have my very first guest star joining us today. I met them back at PNCA as one of my classmates, and they have just recently graduated as of this video. Let's give a warm welcome to Lainey Collado.
Aloha, everybody. My name is Lainey Collado. Lainey Tomiko Lehua Makamai Collado. I am an animation major and artist, digital artist based in Oahu, Hawaii. And I came to love animation from a young age, from anime to Disney to like all things that I watched on the TV or in the theaters. And I eventually came to Pacific Northwest College of Art to get my bachelor's degree of fine arts, which is where I also met my good friend Corey.
So, without further ado, let's get started with our first topic Garfield in Paradise. The special opens with John sneaking Garfield dressed as a boy onto an airplane. After being seated, Garfield has a fantasy of him taking on this celebrity status, and he sings the opening song, Aloha Hawaii. The opening kind of reminded me of that Elvis movie where he does go to Hawaii. Is there like any significance of Elvis being in Hawaii beyond the whole movie thing?
So Elvis came to Hawaii a couple times before his first concert in 1957. Elvis loved Hawaii so much he ended up coming back a few times. One of his most well-known concerts was the Aloha from Hawaii via satellite, which was in 1973. There were three major films that Elvis starred in that took place in Hawaii. That is Blue Hawaii, Paradise Hawaiian Style, and Girls, Girls, Girls. All were filmed within the 1960s. The most iconic and the most prominent out of all these films is Blue Hawaii. The biggest reason for Blue Hawaii's success was primarily Elvis's songs, which, according to the book Hard Sell of Paradise, quote, the more likely explanation for Elvis's movie success was the lucrative soundtrack market that went with it. The same Globe piece added at the end, Presley's records and his music publishing business swell his annual receipts. Some people have estimated that Elvis might get between $4 million and $5 million in 1965, which is big business. A mere month and a half after its debut, one trade paper reported that, quote, the sales of Elvis Presley's Blue Hawaii LP have now topped the 600,000 mark, and that the album sold 350,000 copies in the first week of release, end quote. And within a few months, it would end up being what is believed to be the fastest selling LP to reach the million mark. So when you put it together, a famous face with a pretty place who's very talented, it ends up creating the perfect formula for tourist attraction.
The opening of Garfield does have a lot of significance to Elvis, but not only Elvis. And what I did catch in the opening is that when the announcer announced Garfield, he announced him as Garfield Ho. And I think that is also a reference to a famous local legend singer. His name was Don Ho, and he was known for doing Waikiki shows. One of his famous songs is things like Tiny Bubbles. And I think Garfield has kind of like that same sound with Don Ho that he has to it. He's a pretty iconic figure in Hawaii.
Upon arriving at their hotel, they learned that Odie had stowed away in John's suitcase, and that the hotel itself was pretty run down. So they decide to go to the beach and rent a car. At the retailer, they meet a Frank Nelson-like salesman who gives them a Chevrolet Bel Air. After some time at the beach, the car mysteriously sends them off to a tribe of native Hawaiians. Their leader tells them that a similar car, owned by a James Dean impersonator, taught them the ways of the new world, and furthermore saved their lives from a volcano by driving into it. Just from this story alone, it definitely sounds like they're trying to work their way around a hurtful stereotype, but they fail miserably.
I think this whole show within itself is problematic, not only on how like they showcase the native coded people, especially when they call them the ding dongs, I believe. That's what they are called in the show. Correct me if I'm wrong. Not
No,
only
I
that,
think that's right.
it's called the ding dongs. Like, and there's this colonialistic narrative to it, especially when this James Dean's character comes to this native tribe and like shows them the ways of his people, which in Hawaii there has been a lot of dark history, especially with colonialism, especially with Christian missionaries who came from America to spread Christianity. And that eventually like it changed a lot, especially not only was this a religious thing, but this was also a political thing as well.
To summarize the overthrow, in 1893, a group of white American missionary descended businessmen and politicians, also known as the Committee of Safety, illegally overthrew and annexed the Kingdom of Hawaii. Their primary reason was greed. In finding business opportunities in things such as sugar production, these racist businessmen and politicians wanted to control it all. They acted in a coup against the crown and falsely imprisoned Queen Liliuokalani for treason. They threatened her and the people to force her to give up the throne through the support of the American Navy. There was no treaty of annexation at all, and many people protested against this. Language was banned, Asian workers' rights were taken away, and till this day, many Native Hawaiians are still fighting for sovereignty against the damage done by the US and the Committee of Safety. One of the main things that led to the ban on Hawaiian culture, especially on hula, was missionary influence, Christian missionary influence. Years after Captain Cook's arrival and death in Hawaii, and after King Kamehameha I united all the islands under his rule, American Protestant missionaries came to the Hawaiian Islands to spread the word of God. Queen Ka'ahumanu, King Kamehameha's most favored wife, converted to Christianity, as well as the ruling class, also known as the Ali'i. The biggest reason for this was to abolish the kapu system. The kapu system were strict and sacred laws that told the people what to do and what not to do in order to keep society in balance and care for the aina. From what you could eat, when you could eat certain foods, to gender roles, to politics, to worship, and almost everything. These laws were so strict, it was even punishable by death. Queen Ka'ahumanu wanted to reject those old beliefs of the kapu system and promote Christian values, but in doing so, this would end up banning ancient practices like hula. Not only was it seen as promiscuous, but also pagan to Western Christian eyes. And then in the reign of King Liholiho, also known as King Kamehameha II, the kapu was officially abolished. The arrival of the American missionaries changed everything. Disease brought over, like leprosy, took the lives of about 90% of the native Hawaiian population. Plantations and laws like the Great Mahele displaced native Hawaiians from their homes and changed the way how the land was laid, and forever changed the geography and ecosystem of the land, where native species were going extinct and natural resources were gone. But this is only just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to talk about on how American missionaries changed Hawaii forever and how it eventually led to the overthrow, as well as the illegal annexation of the Hawaiian kingdom.
Aside from the chief, the group also meet a few other members of the tribe, including Monkey, who works on the car, and the town crier, who goes by the name Pigeon.
Pigeon was supposed to be, I believe, a caricature of a local person from Hawaii who speaks Pidgin English, and he speaks kind of like this broken English that's kind of gibberish with it. And like, if you don't know what Pidgin English is a language spoken in Hawaii that was created people from around the world who came to Hawaii to work in the plantations. And because not everybody spoke the same language, they all mixed their languages together. And so you have like Hawaiian, you have Japanese, Chinese, English, Portuguese, Filipino influences, all these influences from across the world combining together, which also talks about like local Hawaii culture as well, which is all these influences from around the world coming together and like speaking this language. And for a good bit, Pidgin was banned because it was seen as very improper to like English, but it is now a official language that everyone speaks, and I speak a little bit of it too.
But most notably, they meet the chief's daughter and her cat, whom falls in love with John and Garfield. But soon their love turns to sorrow when the volcano begins to erupt and it's revealed that the princess and her cat has to sacrifice themselves to save the village. I believe that this is a big cliche that's in pretty much any tropical-based movie.
I was thinking about that too, but also just about the princess itself, because that reminds me of a film, an old film from like the early 20th century that was about a white man who came to some tropical island, if I can remember correctly. It came to some tropical island. He fell in love with the princess, and then she had to sacrifice herself to the volcano. But it does have that song, and the princess's name was Kalua, and you can hear it a lot in if you go to luau's, or like if you go here, if you listen to it, it's a song that you can hear a lot as well, and the song is called "The Hour of Kalua."
Kalua is from a 1951 film called The Bird of Paradise. It's based on the 1912 play by Richard Walton Tully by the same name, The Bird of Paradise. And also, Kalua means to bake in an underground oven. So, in the last scene where Kalua goes to sacrifice herself in the volcano, yeah.
I think it's because of things like this, and just like also again, like Kalua, the princess falls in love with, what was his name again? John, who is white. It also comes with this fetishization of the native people as well, which again comes from a very colonialistic point of view. And something, a little tidbit from Hanna Trask, where this comes from is this kind of what she likes to call cultural prostitution. So cultural prostitution is basically where a culture is being sold for a commodity to benefit something else. So here she says, prostitution in this context refers to the entire institution that defines a woman, and by extension, the female, as an object of degraded and victimized sexual value for use and exchange to the medium of money. The prostitute is a woman who sells her sexual capacities and is seen thereby to possess and reproduce them at will. That is by her very quote-unquote nature. The prostitute and the institution that creates that and maintains her are, of course, of patriarchal origin. The pimp is the conduit of exchange, managing the commodity that is the prostitute, while acting as the guard and the entry and exit gates, making sure the prostitute behaves as a prostitute by fulfilling her sexual economic functions. The victims participate in their victimization with enormous ranges of feeling, from resistance to complicity, but the force and continuity of the institution are shaped by men. So that's one thing. And then she continues on and says, Hawaii itself is the female object of degraded and victimized sexual value. Our aina, our lands, are not any longer the source of food and shelter, but the source of money. Land is now called real estate rather than our mother, papa. The American relationship of the people to land is of the exploiter and the exploited. This also goes to how Native women are also represented in film as well. There is a test known as the Isla test, where in pop culture media, it's a test that shows that is supposed to like, what is the one test where it's like the conversation between two women and they can't talk about men? It's kind of like that feeling, but it's like a checklist for if this character, the Bechdel test. It kind of has like a very similar thing to the Bechdel test, but it's more focused on Native women, especially in how they're presented in media. And the rules are they have to be a woman, they do not die or get sexually assaulted, and they do not fall in love with the white man.
It definitely sounds sexist.
It is extremely sexist, misogynistic, and it comes from this, Hanna Trask said, a very patriarchal view, which it's a colonialistic point of view.
However, it is revealed that the volcano actually was John's car, and with help from Odie, Monkey is able to drive it into the volcano and stop the eruption. The two are hailed as heroes in the return to the village. I think that this was a very stereotyped film. Even though it takes it in a different direction, there are still some very touchy topics that would be pretty problematic in today's culture. On top of that, none of the members of the tribe are even voiced by native Hawaiians.
I think a lot of the people who are voicing these characters aren't at least from Hawaii or don't have any context of that at all, because this comes from a very fantasized and fetishized version of Hawaii. Of, oh, this beautiful paradise with all these negative stereotypes of the indigenous people.
And because of these stereotypes, I feel this is one Garfield special you should probably skip. Our next film is entitled Aloha Scooby Doo. The movie opens with preparations for a surfing contest, and one of the contestants, Manu, witnesses his girlfriend Snooky being kidnapped by some tiki spirits. One of the first things I noticed about this movie when I watched it was that the tourists were referred to as mainlanders. Is that accurate at all? Because I was never called that when I went there.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. We usually call like mainlanders mainlanders. I would call you a mainlander, but usually mainlander and tourist are kind of interwoven with each other. Tourist can mean like, oh, he's a Japanese tourist, but like knowing where you're from. Like I would call you a mainland tourist because you're from the mainland. You're from America, but you're a tourist here. Like I know what kind of person. And in the context, what he means by mainlanders is people from the mainland settling into Hawaii and taking up the land and buying the land. I think that's what, in the context, it means too, not only like the touristy thing, but also like the settler colonialism that is happening in Hawaii.
When Mr. Ike arrives in Hawaii, they learn that the events were caused by the Wiki Tiki, a godlike spirit who would scare off Portuguese settlers during the 1850s and even caused a volcano to erupt. I'm
I
pretty
think
sure
it's
that didn't happen, but is there like anything similar to a Wiki Tiki, or is that just Hollywood nonsense?
the term Wiki Tiki itself, and just like the gibberish in a lot of Scooby-Doo, it's just gibberish of things that sound like they're Hawaiian. Like for example, there's a scene where the guy is supposed to be doing an oli, a chant to the Wiki Tiki. And like I was listening to it very carefully, and it's roughly something like the beautiful, the beloved, the water, the sun, and it just repeats, or that's what it sounds like. It's just repeated phrases and just gibberish, especially Hanahuna Bay. That's not a real place in Hawaii. I think it's like a reference to something like Hanauma Bay, but there's like again Wiki Tiki. I remember as part of my thesis, I looked at the behind the scenes of the Scooby-Doo voice actors, and one of which is a person who lived in Hawaii, who acted in Hawaii for a little bit. And I think he was like the guy who was selling like Wiki Tiki merchandise. He
Adam West.
Adam West, yeah, I think what's it called? He acted in some films and some TV shows in Hawaii, but also he said like in that little behind the scenes, there's a snippet of him looking at the camera or looking at like the people and just being like, you know what wiki means, right? And then he's like, it would actually mean quick tiki. And there's something about like that wiki tiki again, that's just gibberish. It's just gibberish. It's not real. It's not real. A lot of this is just made up, especially when it comes to the mythology that is used in this is barely anything. I could go on a rant.
After some of the Wiki Tiki spirits wreck a luau, Anu volunteers to take the gang to see the Shaw woman, Auntie Mahina, but gets kidnapped along the way. What's the gang find Auntie Mahina's hut? She consults the bones and gives Fred a root necklace to warn off evil spirits. Would you say this is a stereotype?
Yes,
Okay, because I mostly know that stereotype from like African and Native American tribes, but I didn't know if it was such a stereotype with Native Hawaiians as well.
Yeah, this is a stereotype with any kind of native or like a very exotic thing. And it reminded me of this other movie that I watched. It was a 70s, I believe it was a 70s film. It's called Blood Moon, and it takes place in Hawaii.
I thought it was called Death Moon.
I'm so sorry. I meant Death Moon, not Blood Moon.
It's a live action film, and the opening scene is
Literally
it's
just a shaman.
yeah, and they're if I can remember right, that movie was painful to watch. They were known as like
Okay.
the voodoo cult, which is
Oh,
not, and it's
yeah.
a werewolf movie, and they were
Oh, I've
cursing
heard
this
of this
mission.
movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mentioned it in Gothic literature class with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that movie was weird and like it was very stereotypical, but Auntie Mahina, she wouldn't be known as a shaman if she was a practitioner. She would actually be known as a kahuna. So a kahuna is sometimes known as a priest, but most of all, they are an expert in something. So an example, kahuna la'au lapa'au is a person who is an expert in medicine. Yeah, so she would be probably known as that, but again, with like the shaman mysticism, it's just kind of again, it stems from stereotype as well. But there's a lot in Scooby-Doo that I could rant about.
Later on, the gang go to a waterfall where they last saw the Wiki Tiki and discover a secret passage through some caves. Eventually, they come across an opening where they discover that not only are the Tiki's minions mechanical, and that the surfboard it uses is modern, but that the recent volcano eruptions have been rigged with steam. In order to catch the Wiki Tiki, the gang enter the contest. After successfully outsurfing him, the Wiki Tiki is revealed to be Manu, who took advantage of the legends of the Wiki Tiki to scare off the tourists, and even faked his kidnapping once the gang got involved. What's more, Snooky was revealed to have faked her kidnapping and, being a genius that she is, used the Tiki animatronics to scare off locals so the two of them can buy the property afterwards. The two are arrested and Scooby Doo becomes the winner of the surfing contest, ending the film with the mystery solved.
Let's talk a little bit more about the ending of Scooby Doo for a second. The ending shows Manu and Snooki, who are both Hawaiians, getting arrested after being caught for being the Wiki Tiki. This, off screen, is actually a dire problem. In the Honolulu Civil Beat article, Native Hawaiians are overrepresented in prisons, West states, Native Hawaiians are disproportionately locked up in the Hawaii criminal justice system, making up only 20% of the general population, but 40% of people in prison. Similar imbalances are true for indigenous people across the country. The ending itself is extremely problematic because it perpetuates a terrible stereotype of criminalizing Hawaiians as well as other Pacific Islander and indigenous peoples. Not only does this movie villainize Native Hawaiian people, but it also showcases a very real problem that isn't taken seriously. Oh, and I would like to add one more thing to that. The Hawaiian phrase for tiki is ki'i. Not tiki, ki'i. K-I okina I. Ki'i.
The conclusion to the mystery felt kind of abrupt since there was some explanations that were pretty last minute. And personally, I was never a fan of the What's New Scooby Doo era, which this film was made during. But as far as the representation towards Hawaiian culture goes, why don't we turn it over to Lainey for her opinion?
I remember watching Aloha Scooby-Doo, not only as part of my thesis, but also watching it when I was a kid and just feeling like I didn't know what it was at the time. I couldn't understand it, what the weird feeling was, but now that I'm an adult, I understand it. That it was like the uncomfortable feeling knowing that that's not Hawaii, that's not really what I grew up with. And it's so strange.
With this in mind, I would not recommend this film to anyone who's looking for good representation of Hawaiian culture. Wiki Tiki itself is just some Hollywood nonsense made to bring in audiences. Our last film for the day will be the classic Disney movie Lilo and Stitch.
Oh yeah. Lilo and Stitch. After watching Garfield and Scooby-Doo, Lilo and Stitch was a breath of fresh air.
I bet. The film opens with the mad scientist Jumbo being put on trial for creating Experiment 626. After 626 escapes custody, Jumbo, along with Earth expert Pleakley, are sent to the island of Hawaii on Earth to retrieve him. This is when we are introduced to Lilo, a young Hawaiian girl who has trouble fitting in with the other peers in her hula class. When we are introduced to the main setting in Hawaii, I found it interesting that they would open up the scene with hula dancing accompanied by the opening song. Any thoughts on this, Lainey?
They actually consulted with a kumu hula, a person who teaches hula, with the actual hula movement itself. And I remember from that behind the scenes, they were really want to make sure that the hula was shown in a light of respect and not in this way of like, oh, the cute little pretty native girl dancing on top of the stage kind of thing with the Tahitian dancers. No, because it's an art form that has been used. That's and also surfing. They're very important pieces of Hawaiian culture. Hula tells the story of genealogies. It tells the stories of mythology. It tells a lesson. It tells lessons. These are very important mo'olelos. The reason why this art of storytelling is so important is because it keeps the culture alive. It keeps the philosophy alive. And there's another reason hula is also very important. Historically, for a long time, hula was banned because of Christian influence. Hula was banned, and it wasn't until King David Kalakaua lifted the ban, and with that ban, he revived hula. He revived hula and a lot of the Hawaiian cultural arts that were about to go extinct.
Why was it banned in the first place anyway? Was it because of the swaying hips?
Yeah, it was like that, and it was also seen as very pagan as well to very Christian missionaries. And at this time, there was a lot of Christian influence that even had influenced the leaders of Hawaii, the Ali'i.
When Lilo returns to her home, we are introduced to her older sister and caregiver, Nani, as well as their new social worker, Cobra Bubbles. The interview with Lilo on how she's being cared for doesn't go well. And they are given 3 days to get Cobra Bubbles to change his mind about Lilo staying with Nani. After the sisters have a fight, the two make up that night, and they agree to try to get along better. Just then, Lilo notices a falling star and decides to wish for a friend. Unbeknownst to her, that falling star was actually 626's ship. No sooner does he emerge from his ship, 626 gets run over by a truck and ends up in an animal shelter. No sooner does he try escaping, he learns that Jumbo and Pleakley are waiting for him. Luckily, Nani and Lilo have arrived to adopt a dog, and posing as one, 626, now going by the name Stitch, is adopted by Lilo. Seeing this as a problem, Pleakley has him and Jumbo disguise themselves as humans in order to get close to Stitch. During one of their attempts, they inadvertently cause Nani to lose her job at a luau. Once they arrive home, Nani suggests returning Stitch to the shelter, but Lilo demands that he stay, reminding her that he is now part of the Hanna, which means family. This allows Stitch to be able to stay. The next morning, Cobra Bubbles arrives and tells Nani that unless she can get a new job, Lilo has to be taken away. He also becomes suspicious of Stitch and tells them that he needs to be a model citizen. While Nani searches for a new job, Lilo tries to teach Stitch how to be a model citizen using Elvis Presley as an example. But each attempt fails on both ends due to Stitch. Per the advice of Nani's boyfriend David, the group take a surfing break to relax. This leads to my favorite scene in the whole movie, the Hawaiian roller coaster ride number, which shows the characters surfing. Because it originated in Hawaii, this wouldn't be a cliche, would it?
It is extremely, extremely, extremely embedded. It's like since ancient times.
That's good because they used a lot of stuff in videos to reference for the animators. At some point, Jumbo and Pleakley interfere and nearly drown both Stitch and Lilo in the process. And although they get rescued, this is enough to convince Cobra Bubbles that Lilo needs to be taken away and that he'll come for her in the morning. Stitch begins to feel ashamed that he is causing too many problems for Lilo and her family at this point and runs away. But while Nani tries to get a job one last time, Stitch returns with Jumbo and Pleakley, who had just been fired by the impatient Grand Councilwoman, close behind him. During the fight, the house explodes just as Nani and Cobra arrive. And while the two argue about Lilo being taken away, she runs off. After bumping into Stitch and learning that he is in fact an alien as well, the two get captured by Captain Gantu, who the Grand Councilwoman had set to replace Jumbo and Pleakley. And while Stitch escapes, Lilo is still held captive. And just as Jumbo and Pleakley arrive to arrest him, Nani pleads to have them help save Lilo. After Stitch convinces Jumbo to help them, they then go to their very large spaceship and chase after Gantu. I found this scene very interesting because originally they were going to hijack an airplane and chase Gantu through a city. The plane was changed into a spaceship and the city became a mountain landscape because of the events of 9/11, forcing them to make the changes. Anyway, they managed to save Lilo and arrive at a beach, but just then the Grand Councilwoman arrives to arrest Stitch. But Stitch, having had his personality adjusted, gets permission to say goodbye to Lilo and Nani, calling them his newly found family. Oh, Hanna is pointed out a lot in this film that it means family, and family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. And I saw from a couple of interviews that it also relates to like found family, which I guess applies to Stitch because he's technically not related to Lilo, but understands the importance of family in this movie.
Yes, yes, of course. Not only is that like found family, like that reminds me of Hanai, where it's kind of like adoption, but it's like what you said kind of reminds me a little bit about Hanai, which is where the adoption of like a relative into like your family. But yes, Ohana is a very, very, very important piece in Hawaiian culture, especially in the movie that it's said, because the word Ohana comes from the word Oha, which is part of the kalo plant. And the reason why Ohana and Oha has a connection to the kalo plant is because of the Hawaiian creation story. The Hawaiian creation story starts off with
Papa and Vakea have a daughter together. Her name was Ho'ohokukalani, and Vakea and his daughter have Haloa, their first child, who is stillborn, and that stillborn baby, they bury it in the ground, and that becomes the kalo plant, and they have another child named Haloa, and that becomes the first man.
So there is a familial connection with the land and with the people. It's like you take care of the land takes care of us. And it's this familial connection with the land. And I think also this importance of Ohana, this importance of the connection between Nani, Lilo, and Stitch, where these are people being torn apart, where it's like the history of Hawaii is being torn apart, people being torn apart from the land. But with the story itself having Stitch in it, this is a story about reconnecting with family, and in turns, it's kind of a story of reconnecting with kind of indigeneity as well, in a sense like that. It's a cultural connection of Ohana from people who are being torn apart, but then putting back together.
Which brings us to the resolution. Remembering that she adopted Stitch, Lilo shows the Grand Councilwoman the papers showing that she legally owns Stitch and that taking him away would be considered stealing. This allows Stitch to be able to live on Earth with Lilo and Nani, and they are put under protection of the Galactic Alliance, allowing them to be together. Of course, this also means that Cobra Bubbles, who was revealed to be a former FBI agent, is now unable to take Lilo away. And the film ends on a happy note with a montage of them spending time together as a newly formed family. Besides the fact that this was Disney's cheapest animated movie at the time, and the fact that they used watercolor backgrounds, something that had not been done since Dumbo, I found the behind the scenes information to be very fascinating. If you look at the deleted scenes, there's a scene where she actually causes a riot and pretends to bring a tsunami. Leading up to that scene, tourists all being racist towards her is like, hey, speak English, which ways to the beach?
Yeah, there are moments like that where it's like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, a fan theory was that she takes pictures of tourists as a way to like counteract the fact that her people are being basically put on display.
That's an interesting theory. Uh, I thought it was just kind of her little hobby that she does.
Yeah, the behind the scenes also states that a big challenge was to not romanticize the film and like Hawaiian stuff and make it feel more like a community atmosphere.
Oh
How
yeah.
good do you think they succeeded at that?
I think they did a pretty good job at it because unlike what we've seen in Garfield and Scooby-Doo, Lilo and Stitch, there is this nuance to want to appreciate more than appropriate, especially the life of people from Hawaii. Honestly, like coming from a place of people who grew up with Lilo and Stitch, who have seen the movie and loved it, it's because of this want for more of respect, cultural respect, than it really is more respect than to sell. That's what I think separates the movie Lilo and Stitch from Scooby-Doo and Garfield. Yes, there are like some moments where it can be, it's like little moments where it can like where it makes mistakes here and there, or like it has like a little bit of a misconception here and there, or just there's a few points where it one of the mistakes was renaming the mele in the beginning where it has the hula. The original name is Hemele Inoa Kalakaua, and it was about King Kalakaua. And I believe after that they decided to rename it Hemele non Lilo, which is like what my kumu during my thesis, that was my kumu said, like that's a big no-no to rename something. But that's I feel like that's more on Disney. And there's also like a scene where like a guy speaks pigeon, like what we on here. Oh, I think something stays stuck under the tender. Like it was,
The
yeah,
scene
it
where
was,
Stitch gets run over.
yeah. When he says that, maybe it's just me, but like maybe it's probably just me, but everybody has like different like but everyone in like pidgin English is not the same in like the different islands. Like Big Island, you say I shave, then shave ice.
One thing I found interesting was that Nani and David's voice actors were actually consulted and they got to use some Hawaiian slang.
Oh yeah, some pidgin English as well. I think like that goes on to like a point that I'd like to make is like having people like the voice actors of Donnie and David, having people like that on your team, I think helps bring a more authentic voice to it as well as a more respectful voice. Instead of making things up or just kind of assuming, having somebody there to help you with the writing, with the slang, with the daily life, as well as just the creation of what you want to create is so important. It avoids appropriation and there's a lot more respect for it. And it's not just kind of like this feeling of tokenism. It's like, oh, you would actually say XYZ kind of thing. For my thesis, I worked with Hawaiian consultants to help me write as well as to help me design some characters. So having those voices help you gives you a better understanding of what to do and what not to do. And this is a thing also like making up a culture or basing a culture or are writing about a culture that isn't really theirs or they don't know much on. Having people who have had that culture or have had that experience or know a lot about that really helps you. And most people think like there's also things like, is it going to be restrictive? Well, no, actually. It actually helps you to be more creative of what you can do because people are giving you options as much as like saying yes and no. There's people who like say, hey, what about this instead? That's the whole thing about collaboration and raising those voices raising those voices of the people that you want to portray in your film. It's not just, oh, the pretty Hawaiian woman. It's a person with deep character. It's a person who has experiences. It's people who've put their experiences and said, hey, it would actually be XYZ. And again, it's the intention of respect that is more important when creating something, especially like regardless if you're Native Hawaiian, if you're Kama'aina like me, which is a person who's born and raised in Hawaii but not Hawaiian. If you are Native American, if you are a person who's from the Black community, if you're just somebody, it's good to have somebody as like consultants to be there to say, what can you do, what you can't do, like what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, to get a respectful portrayal.
There's been a lot of fan theories that say that Lilo is on the autism spectrum, even though it's not stated outright in the film.
Yeah.
Which I can relate to because she was one of the few people I could relate to growing up, even though she's a cartoon character. Because at the time, autism wasn't really common knowledge. And did you say you were on the spectrum too?
Yes, I am autistic. And it's kind of funny, like rewatching this movie just kind of like made me realize, yeah, I guess it at first I didn't really think about the theory as much. It was kind of like, oh, Lilo is autistic. The Lilo is autistic theory. It wasn't until I watched the movie again where I was like, yeah, yeah,
She has a routine with having to feed Pudge. She acts a little more mature than most of the kids her age.
Yeah, and like this kind of there's this kind of like nuance or not nuance. There's this perspective that I started to see with her, especially with like my experiences growing up, especially on how the scene in the beginning where it's like I get disciplined and then she sees Nani do like she's like no no no
Yeah.
no 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 that's about 5 times a week. I'm like, oh my God, that has happened. That has happened. Stuff like that has happened in my life. This experience with Nani is very similar to experience with like my mom, my dad, and my sister, where it's like trying to take care of me because I'm a little different.
I can relate too because I got upset pretty easily over the slightest comment.
Oh yeah.
And like Lilo, just being called weird or crazy is enough to make her act out.
And like the I think the feeling of isolation as well, or like loneliness relates to me as well, because there were times where I was a bit lonely and still today that I sometimes feel like I'm a little bit alone sometimes, but then I've started to like just growing up, just understand my loneliness and try to work around it or heal from it or just remind myself that I'm not alone, that I don't have to be alone. There are wonderful people in this world that have helped me and I that are my friends, that are my family, that I care for so much and who care for me. Going back to the term ohana means family, there's this feeling of like, don't forget who loves you. Don't forget who loves you. This kind of like the bondness of people so that you don't have to be alone in this world. You don't have to be lost. Or like when you're lost, there's always somebody there for you. Yeah,
Yes.
that's my take on that, on the
Yeah.
Lilo is autistic theory. I think it's a cool
Yeah.
theory.
With all this information being put into consideration, I would say this would be a total recommendation, not just for Disney fans, but for anyone who is looking for better representation of the Hawaiian culture, as well as potentially for those who are on the spectrum, since, as stated before, Lilo has been coded as autistic. So go ahead and give it a watch. I guarantee that it will be a good film. And with that, we end this episode of Critimation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on this podcast with me, and I hope you have a great career going forward post graduation.
Thank you so much, Corey. Thank you so much for letting me be part of this podcast of yours. It's been an honor. Mahalo.
Thanks for tuning in to Critimation. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And follow me on Twitter. Or support me on Patreon. I'm open to suggestions, and I will see you next time.